The sky above the crystalline city of Lyratha shimmered in layered colors as twin suns dipped toward the horizon, bathing towers of living stone in violet and gold light. Zyra of House Vale stood on the balcony of her family archive, her silver-blue skin glowing softly as she watched the city awaken for the evening cycle. Behind her, the heavy doors slid open with a gentle hum, and Eli stepped inside, his boots echoing awkwardly against the ancient floor. Eli was human, soft-skinned, narrow-eyed, and endlessly curious, a guest from a distant death world who had somehow earned a place among the scholars of Lyratha. Zyra smiled without turning, already sensing his presence through the faint distortion his emotions caused in the ambient field. "You are late," she said teasingly, her voice musical and calm. Eli laughed nervously and scratched the back of his neck, explaining that he had gotten lost again in the spiral corridors. Zyra turned to face him, amusement glowing in her luminous eyes, and gestured toward the central chamber of the archive. At the heart of the room stood a pedestal grown from black crystal, and upon it rested armor unlike anything Eli had ever seen. It was not forged from metal, but from layered plates of dark, iridescent material that looked grown rather than built, etched with symbols that seemed to shift when not directly observed. "This," Zyra said with mock ceremony, "is the armor of my ancestor Vale Kyrith, first shield of the stellar Concord." Eli approached slowly, feeling an unexpected pressure in his chest as he neared the relic. Zyra noticed and laughed softly, explaining that the armor was bonded to her bloodline and harmless to others. "Harmless," she repeated, then tilted her head with a mischievous expression. She dared him to try it on, just for a moment, as a joke to see how ridiculous a human would look wearing legendary alien armor. Eli hesitated, fully aware that most jokes in alien cultures tended to involve at least mild risk of injury or humiliation. But Zyra's smile was warm, and curiosity overcame caution. With her guidance, he stepped onto the platform as the armor plates lifted slightly, responding to Zyra's gesture. As the first piece touched Eli's skin, the chamber lights dimmed abruptly, and a deep harmonic vibration filled the air. Zyra's amusement vanished as ancient symbols flared to life across the armor, glowing with blinding intensity. The pedestal cracked, energy surged outward, and Eli screamed as power he did not understand answered a call no one had meant to make. And far beneath the city, something very old stirred from its sleep. Eli collapsed to his knees as the armor sealed itself around him, moving with a will of its own. The plates reshaped to fit his human frame, altering subtly, adapting, learning. Zyra rushed forward, panic breaking through her composed exterior, calling his name as the archive trembled. Ancient defense fields activated across the city as alarms sang in resonant tones no one had heard in centuries. Eli felt fire in his veins, not burning but expanding, as if his body was suddenly too small for his own soul. Visions flooded his mind, stars being born, wars fought in silence between worlds, and warriors clad in the same living armor standing against cosmic horrors. Zyra placed her hands on his chest, trying to disengage the relic through blood command, but the armor ignored her completely. Instead, symbols rearranged themselves, forming new patterns never recorded in Vale history. A voice echoed inside Eli's thoughts, ancient yet curious, asking not who he was, but what he was willing to protect. He gasped out a single answer, thinking of Zyra, of Earth, of fragile lives scattered across the stars. The vibrations softened, the armor's glow stabilized, and the destructive surge faded into a deep, controlled hum. The archive doors burst open as guardians flooded in, weapons raised, only to freeze at the sight before them. A human stood encased in the sacred armor of House Vale, eyes glowing with restrained starlight, posture steady and unbroken. Zyra stared in awe and fear, realizing the armor had not awakened to blood, but to intent. For the first time in recorded history, the relic had chosen someone outside the lineage. And beyond the city's shields, hostile sensors flared as dormant enemies detected the ancient power reborn. Eli sat within the Hall of Echoes, surrounded by elders whose lifespans spanned millennia. The armor rested dormant, yet watchful, responding to his breath, his heartbeat, his emotions. Zyra stood beside him, refusing to leave, her presence a silent anchor in the storm of scrutiny. The elders revealed truths long hidden, explaining that the armor was never meant for a single species. It was created as a covenant tool, bonded to those capable of resonating with its core directive, defense of life against extinction-level threats. Humanity, it seemed, carried a rare adaptive trait, an emotional intensity that allowed deeper synchronization with relics of the old war. Eli listened, overwhelmed, realizing that the joke had unlocked a responsibility spanning galaxies. Before any decision could be made, the hall shook as an emergency transmission cut through the chamber. An ancient enemy known only as the Devourer Collective had breached the outer systems, drawn by the armor's awakening. Zyra clenched her fists, guilt and determination warring within her, knowing she had set this chain of events in motion. Eli rose, the armor responding instantly, and declared that if the enemy had come because of him, then he would stand against them. The elders exchanged glances heavy with history, then bowed in unison, recognizing a legend in its first breath. The battlefield unfolded in the void between suns, as fleets clashed in silence and light. Eli stood at the forefront, suspended within a sphere of controlled gravity projected by the armor. Energy shields curved like wings around him as enemy constructs swarmed forward. Zyra commanded from the bridge of the flagship, her voice steady but her heart pounding with fear for the human she had teased into destiny. The armor guided Eli's movements, but never controlled them, amplifying his will rather than replacing it. With each strike, he felt the presence of the ancestors, not as masters, but as witnesses. Human adaptability merged with ancient technology, creating tactics the enemy could not predict. When the Devourer unleashed its core weapon, Eli positioned himself between the beam and the fleet. The armor flared brighter than ever before, rewriting its own limits in response to his refusal to yield. The beam shattered, the enemy faltered, and for the first time in eons, the Devourer retreated. Across the fleet, cheers erupted as hope returned to systems long resigned to fear. In the quiet aftermath, Eli returned to Lyratha, the armor now a symbol not of bloodline, but of unity. Zyra met him beneath the twin suns, her expression softer, wiser, forever changed. She apologized for treating destiny like a joke, though she smiled as she said it. Eli laughed gently, telling her that some of the greatest stories begin that way. The elders formally recognized him as a guardian of the Concord, the first human to hold the title. Mori armors were uncovered, responding not to species, but to shared resolve across worlds. The galaxy entered a new age, one where ancient power and human spirit stood side by side. And whenever Zyra looked at the armor resting quietly beside Eli, she remembered the moment a joke awakened a legend. Not because of prophecy, not because of blood, but because someone chose to protect what mattered. The weeks following the battle did not bring peace as many had hoped, but instead ushered in a silence far more unsettling than open war. Across the spiral arms, ancient senses once dismissed as ceremonial began to awaken, reacting to the same resonance that had answered Eli when he first wore the armor. Zyra stood within the observation spire, watching star maps shift in real time, their colors deepening as dormant powers stirred from centuries of slumber. The elders moved with uncharacteristic urgency, their calm fractured by the realization that the armor's awakening had not been an isolated event. It was a signal, not a beacon of threat, but a declaration that the age of hiding was over. Eli felt it too, even without wearing the armor, a low hum at the edge of awareness, as if the galaxy itself had become a living thing whispering his name. When he closed his eyes, he no longer saw only memories of the Devourer, but glimpses of countless civilizations watching, waiting, judging. Some with hope, some with fear, and others with the cold calculation of powers, deciding whether humanity was a risk to be eliminated early. Zyra noticed the change in him before he spoke of it, noticing how his posture had shifted, how his gaze carried a weight no human scholar should possess. She asked if the armor was changing him, worried that the relic might be carving away pieces of the man she knew. Eli answered honestly, saying that it was not changing who he was, but forcing him to understand who he had always been capable of becoming. The first delegation arrived without warning, a tri-species envoy from the Heliox Reach, whose worlds had once burned under Devourer raids. They did not come with weapons, but with records, stories etched in crystal memory, recounting how their ancestors had prayed for guardians who never came. They knelt before Eli, not out of submission, but recognition, seeing in him echoes of legends their own cultures had lost. Eli was deeply uncomfortable with their reverence, lifting them to their feet and insisting he was not a god or savior. One of the delegates replied gently that saviors rarely recognize themselves, but are known by the choices they make when fear would be easier. Word spread faster than any fleet could travel, carried by quantum relays and ancient myth channels that predated modern empires. On distant worlds, humans were being watched with new eyes, no longer dismissed as a young species clinging to the edges of galactic politics. Some reacted with awe, others with alarm. Several major powers convened emergency councils, debating whether humanity's emotional volatility combined with ancient weapons made them the most dangerous variable the galaxy had ever seen. Zyra attended these councils alongside Eli, standing firm as accusations were leveled, claiming that humans were unpredictable, reckless, and too willing to sacrifice themselves in ways that destabilized carefully balanced power structures. Eli listened quietly until one counselor accused humanity of awakening weapons they did not understand. He responded calmly, explaining that humanity had spent its entire existence wielding forces it barely understood, fire, gravity, fission, and still choosing, again and again, to learn restraint through consequence. The chamber fell silent, not convinced, but shaken. That night, Zyra and Eli walked beneath the twin suns, now setting earlier due to seasonal shifts, casting long shadows across the crystal terraces. Zyra confessed her fear that she had unleashed something the galaxy would never forgive. Eli admitted that he shared that fear, but added that fear was not a reason to retreat, only a reason to be careful where one stepped. The armor called to him then, not with urgency, but invitation. When he donned it, the stars above seemed to draw closer, constellations aligning in patterns Zyra had never seen. Through the armor, Eli reached outward, not as a warrior, but as a listener. He felt the echoes of other relics awakening, scattered across forgotten systems, responding not to conquest, but to connection. On a remote human colony near the galactic fringe, a mining crew uncovered a structure older than recorded spaceflight, its core activating when a terrified worker shielded others during a collapse. On an aquatic world, a healer sang to calm refugees during a flood, unknowingly synchronizing with a submerged relic that stabilized tectonic fractures. None of these beings wore armor, none fired weapons, yet the same resonance pulsed through them. The elders realized then that the armor of Vale Kyrith had never been unique, only the most visible. The ancients had not built guardians, they had seeded catalysts. Tools that responded to sacrifice, empathy, and resolve, traits humanity carried in abundance, often to its own detriment. Not all reactions were hopeful. A coalition of authoritarian regimes issued an ultimatum, demanding humanity withdraw from interstellar affairs or face preemptive containment. Their fleets mobilized under the justification of maintaining stability. Zyra argued fiercely against them, warning that fear-driven aggression was exactly what the ancients had tried to prevent. Eli asked for time, requesting a chance to speak directly to their leadership without intermediaries. Against all expectation, they agreed, curious to see the human who had shaken the old order. The meeting took place in neutral space, within a hollowed asteroid transformed into a diplomatic arena. Eli entered alone, unarmed, the armor dormant beneath a simple cloak. The leaders mocked this gesture, calling it theatrical weakness. Eli removed the cloak, not to reveal the armor, but to show empty hands. He spoke not of power, but of history, recounting humanity's own cycles of fear, escalation, and near extinction. He admitted that humans were dangerous, not because they sought dominance, but because they refused to abandon others even when logic said they should. He explained that if the galaxy chose to strike humanity now, humans would fight, not to win, but to buy time for others to escape. That statement changed everything. Silence stretched as the leaders realized that containment would not remove the variable, only ignite it. One by one, fleets stood down, not out of trust, but out of recognition that humanity could not be controlled through threat alone. When Eli returned to Lyratha, exhausted beyond measure, Zyra embraced him without words. The city itself seemed brighter, its living structures resonating gently with a future no longer bound by ancient hierarchies. The elders formally amended the Concord Charter, declaring that guardianship was no longer a title inherited or granted, but assumed through action. Humans were invited, not as rulers, but as partners, bridges between instinct and legacy. Eli declined statues, declined monuments, insisting that legends fossilized living ideals. Instead, he helped establish academies where species trained together, learning not just combat, but empathy, de-escalation, and shared survival. Zyra took on the role of historian, recording not just victories, but mistakes, ensuring the truth remained uncomfortable enough to matter. Years passed, measured not in conquest, but in cooperation. The Devourer remained a threat, lurking beyond mapped space, but it no longer faced a fragmented galaxy. It faced one learning to stand together. Sometimes, late at night, Zyra would ask Eli if he regretted stepping onto the pedestal that day. He would smile softly and answer that some jokes reveal truths the universe has been waiting to tell. And far across the stars, when new relics stirred, they did not awaken to blood or command or destiny. They awakened to choice.